Okay. So as a preliminary matter, I'm Brian Collar and Chair of the Newbury Conservation Commission. Permit me to confirm that all members are present and can hear me. Conservation Commission members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Ben Gehagen, who we know is not here and won't be attending. Dan Streeter.
Yes.
Frank Wittenkamp, who we don't know yet. He may show up. Mary Rimmer.
Here.
Peter Pecos.
Yes.
I have to step out for 1 minute. I'll be right back.
Okay. And then town staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Samantha Holt.
Yes.
Beautiful. Okay, good. Speaking of Frank, you still don't know, right?
I have not heard from him, no.
Okay. All right. Sam, did we all apply to you with the questionnaire?
Just about everyone did, everybody except for Frank and Pete. But everybody else did. The only two people that I've seen have been Dan and Ben. I haven't looked at yours and Mary's because I left the office around 3 o'clock today. So.
Okay. Do we want to sort of engage with that item? I mean, Sam, put that together and sort of summarize it, or
I can
send her those things and then all have the answers summarized, or I don't know if it matters now that we're in a meeting. We can just ask you the questions to your face. Whatever you guys think works. Let's just, since we're waiting on anybody else. Mary, we're just gonna engage with your questionnaire.
okay.
Do you want to finish the script, Brian?
Do I need to?
Just the fact of why we're meeting this way. Yeah.
All right. Let's see which part. All right, so the viewers at home, here we go. Introduction to remote meeting. Good evening. This April 19th, 2022 open meeting of the Newbury Conservation Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with the act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, which extends the governor's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law until July 15th, 2022. This order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along the deliberations of the meeting. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and that attendees are participating by video and or telephone conference, and the recording will be available on the Newbury Access YouTube channel. Meeting materials were provided to the commission members prior to the meeting for review and were posted to the Conservation Commission webpage for public access. And yeah, that's nitty-gritty. Okay. There's the script. So anyway, yeah, Mary, we're just gonna, since it's just us, and this is according to the agenda, the first hour from 7 until 7:30 of this public workshop meeting being held to conduct a public workshop to continue developing the proposed amendment to the Town of Newbury Wetland Bylaw, Chapter 95. We'll also discuss the development of draft regulations related to the new bylaw. This will be a working meeting to hear public input on the proposed amendments and associated regulations as stated on the agenda, and from 7 until 7:30 is set aside for commission discussion. So Mary Rimmer did send us all around a worksheet to help think about the bylaw and our purposes in it. And yeah, that's what I keep referring to. So hopefully any of our YouTube viewers are all caught up now. So Mary, Sam said that she saw Dan's and she saw Ben's. She did not look at yours or mine. And Pete.
Sending mine over to
Okay,
Just now.
in the anonymous route as opposed to answering under a direct spotlight. So yeah, so Sam,
Yeah, the idea was that, Sam would be able to tabulate responses among the members to the various questions so that we could kind of see where we're at on some of the items. And since this is a public meeting, we should either project this questionnaire so that people can see it if they want to, since there's nobody here. I guess that's not necessary, or just talk about each question individually and what our own responses are. I'm gonna see if I can pull that up on my other screen here. Bylaw questionnaire. Okay. Do you feel the town, first question was, do you feel the town needs to enact a new or expanded wetland bylaw to incorporate protection of wetland resources not on Plum Island? And that was intended to make or to determine how many of the current board members are in favor of enacting a new bylaw.
Mary, before we go into this question by question, Sam, are you, do you want to put up some visuals? I mean, is that?
Yep, give me 1 second. I got it coming up right now.
And it really was just a way to kind of get everybody to think about this maybe in a little bit of a more organized way.
Can
so
everybody see that?
Yes, thanks, Sam. And I'm assuming, since we've all had several meetings on that the answer to number one is yes. Am I assuming correctly among everyone that's present?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Then what, the level of rating, how strongly people feel about this. If people are just going along, or if they feel like this is a very important thing for the town to undertake. And I didn't have a good sense from all of the members on that. So I thought it would be good to find out if everybody is a 4 or a 5, or we've got some people that are kind of on the fence. Brian's 4 or 5. Okay.
Pete's 4.
Dan's 5, Pete's 4, and I was a 4 too. I think that it's like maybe not the most critical, but it's certainly very important piece of overall that resource protection in town, in my view anyway. And then the next question had to do with who wants to be the spokesperson for this. Should it get to the point where we're able to come up with some language that everyone's in agreement with and want to present it to town meeting? Obviously, we're not going to town meeting, spring town meeting, and there's yet to be determined if there's a fall town meeting, but presumably even next year at next spring town meeting. Would any of the current members be willing to, present this at town meeting?
I would be, although you've all heard me talk enough to know that I can ramble a bit, so maybe I'm not the best choice, but I can do it. And I think would be better at it, but he won't be on the commission by then. We'll see if we get any speakers maybe. Feel about it.
Right. Some towns hire consultants to help them with the bylaw, and they have sort of a more independent, non-biased, whatever, just very, they don't have anything at stake within the community. So sometimes that's helpful to have a presentation done by a third party. But I don't know if they're always allowed to speak at town meeting either.
I think if they're recognized before the meeting begins, then they have an opportunity to address. And that's what we do for planning.
Right. Is there any opportunity, if we approach the town, to get assistance with this? To have a firm help us with enacting a bylaw? Something that Salem just did. They hired someone, a firm, I think it might have been Beals and Thomas.
I think the big thing there would be getting the funds for it. At the moment, we didn't, when I submitted the new budget for fiscal year 23, we didn't obviously have anything in there for it because it was not something that we had talked about prior to that.
Yep.
And I believe, I don't think there's enough time now, obviously, to put that request in, but it may be something, if we can find grant money for it, if we can find a grant that we could apply for, or if it comes down to it and it's a dire need, we may be able to reach out to Tracy and see if there are any additional funds that could be used for it.
Right.
I'm
Because
not
it's
sure
a really
if-
difficult thing to write this in a public meeting format.
Right.
So, it needs to go through several iterations and be pretty clean by the time it's presented to the full board. And I think there's still issues to work out with the language that has, and it's just a matter of who's got the time and the ability to be able to do that. So we're a little bit on hold with that, I think. So it would be interesting to know if there is like MVPC planning grant money or something to be able to put towards that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and isn't the MVP program is doing their next round of funding? This kind of thing would probably fall into that fairly nicely.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and with something like that, I assume we might have to have other town buy-in with the concept of doing this.
Yeah, probably. Well, I mean, we can just, at this point, we can simply ask Sam to talk to Tracy and find out, all of, because she'll understand the point of the ask and sort of lay out the options in theory, and Martha as well, right? Martha understands enough about this that
Yep.
if the three of them had to sit down and take them 20 minutes.
Yeah, your audio is kind of crackly tonight, Brian.
My internet's been terrible all day, actually. So,
So I would be happy to sit in on a meeting with Tracy if you think that's helpful, Sam.
Yeah,
I
I think it definitely would be helpful if we're gonna try and work out some way to get funding to get a consultant for this. I think it would be helpful, especially to have somebody. I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of this, but I think it would be really helpful to have somebody who's kind of been a part of the process since the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
where did that, was that me? Was that something else? You guys hear that?
No.
Okay. Sorry, I'm cleaning up my internet browser and something had music. All right, cool. Mary, you want to keep driving on this one?
Yeah, I mean, just to wrap that up, I mean, I think that in order to make progress on this, we either have to, my feeling is we either have to do like a real working session, probably in person, to try to hammer out some language, because I don't think that we're that far off, but there's still some big questions that have to be answered. And so that's my thoughts on that. So among those questions is the next item, which is the format of the bylaw change. And there was a lot of concern when we went to, on the first go round of this, of amending the existing Plum Island bylaw, that we could somehow, we were going to somehow affect Plum Island, or we were going to have the ability to increase regulation on Plum Island in the future by doing this, or it was just a lot of concern about residents on Plum Island. And one way to address that is to just create an entirely, don't tie this to the existing bylaw, create a new bylaw, don't amend the existing bylaw. I don't know that we need to necessarily tie it directly to that, because it was so specific about Barrier Beach and what the performance standards are for a barrier beach. And it really doesn't, a lot of the standards don't apply to what we're trying to do. So they are really kind of standalone, and it would be a matter of, everyone in the town would fall under a bylaw. It would just be if you're a Plum Island resident, or any other part of town. And then you kind of get away from the whole problem we were having with the regulations draft that Sam was working on, where we had coastal and inland wetland resources with standards and regulations for them, which was making it confusing, making it seem like we were sort of overlapping with the existing bylaw.
And I think kind of off of that with the whole regulations thing, Brian, I think it was actually you that had made, when I sent out the original regulations draft, I think you were the one who sent back edits to it that said, that added language in that said, this does not apply to Plum Island. And you put it in there a few times. And I think the idea of creating a new standalone document for the new bylaw makes it so that we don't really have to have that language in there, because the regulations would only apply obviously to that specific bylaw. And I think that would really help to alleviate some of the potential issues that could come up, especially for future commissions, future iterations of the commission, future agents that are going to be looking at it and saying, well, this is how I interpret it. And these regulations are talking about all of these coastal properties and coastal resources. We're going to apply that to Plum Island now. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, people are applying those new regulations to Plum Island without maybe, because
it gets confusing how it reads right now. It's confusing for people who don't deal with these kind of bylaws to be able to know which ones apply to them and which ones don't. So this is one way of just starting fresh. And I don't know what everybody feels about that, but did we get responses on this item?
So after hearing this line of this thought process, I was originally of the mindset, let's amend what we have. But if it's creating more conflict, more confusion, and there is something that can be distinguished separate from the needs or the issues of Plum Island, that makes sense. Now, Mary, let me ask you this: what about the so close in between? How do we distinguish? The barrier of not the barrier, but
we would have to. It would have to be something geographic. It would have to be properties on the other side of the bridge, or something. You'd have to use a cutoff. I don't know what it is now. What we use, I assume that's what it is. It's properties over the bridge.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, my take on this is that I think a separate document would be better. For every reason that was just highlighted, but I'm gonna just defer to town council on this one.
Yeah, there may be reasons to not do that. I know
And that's what
typically
we
a
got
bylaw.
at the beginning.
I know typically you can't have a bylaw that only applies to a portion of the population, but that's what the Plum Island bylaw does now. So I don't know that there's. We should look into that. That should be a question for town council.
Right. We've had that discussion, and town council has opined that not having two documents would be cleaner. And I get the feeling it has something to do with what you just said.
Yeah.
Which is why we built it this way, is that,
Yeah.
Maybe some new interpretations will come down. But until town council says otherwise, we should do it the hard way.
Right. Or either that, or you just, you call it chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the bylaw or something, so that we don't try to embed this language in the original bylaw. That's what we were trying to do. And that made it difficult.
If I can pipe in here, I kind of think it's better if it's just one bylaw. It's not as if this hasn't been done before. Newburyport has done this, and I was looking at that today. It's kind of interesting that they've seemed to have encompassed their whole Barrier Beach coastal dune thing, the existing bylaw, it's like a couple of paragraphs. It's not, they have the performance standards for the coastal beach and coastal dunes on Plum Island. And, I think everything else it's sort of like the whole town, but only if you have the resource areas that,
Yeah.
only specific, everything's related to specific resource areas. But I think it might be worth a look at Newburyport and see how they did that. I think when the first draft was done, I think we were just looking at putting together something that was not offensive to anybody. Whereas I think we got a little more time now to maybe kind of structure it a little bit differently. But anyways, I'm more thinking of one bylaw. I think it would almost be more confusing to have two.
Yep. I think Newbury does it have a lot more. I'm trying to remember if Newburyport has their own standalone regulations that are separate from the bylaw.
They do.
Yeah, so that's why ours is different. It has the regulations already embedded in it. So
no, they have the specific performance standards from their initial bylaw.
Yeah.
It's just in there. And, on coastal dune and Barrier Beach, Plum Island, these are the existing performance standards. They just kind of cut them out of, cut and pasted.
Yep.
But anyways, I think maybe a look at what they did. I'm sure you're familiar with their.
Yeah, I've used it. Yep.
But anyways, those are my thoughts.
Okay. Those are all good points. And I'm not pushing one way or another. I just thought it was worth discussing because we're running into some kind of format issues. Okay.
And the other thing is there may be some freshwater wetlands on Plum Island that, don't fall into they're Barrier Beach, but
Right.
there's potential to have some items that are not in the Plum Island bylaw that maybe should be kind of porting over from
Right.
inland type stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's a dicey thing because obviously there was a lot of concern about not messing with that end of things.
Yeah, that would make me nervous. Trying to add anything there. I very much have a hands-off mentality for Plum Island. The division line, would be sort of the channel, right? The back water area where the Merrimack River, where the Parker River marshes are, right? And just say the high water or low water tide line on the other side of that water would be, the boundary, right? Just like get over the water.
Yeah. Yep. Easy enough.
But for instance, like ACEC goes into the basin, and it's pretty hard not to have some overlap, even if it's minor.
Yeah.
And I think
good point.
Find those and deal with them later. Like if we have to figure that all out ahead of time, the very fine print, like you were talking about the basin and the ACEC. I don't know. We'll go into all day. I'd rather just take a broad brush and just say we're staying out. And let's get this done, and we can refine it sometime in the future. But maybe that's too pessimistic. Hi, Mary, what do you think? You want to keep going?
Sure. So which of these items would you want to have included in a new or amended bylaw? And I think I had all except for scenic views and passive recreational interests.
Same.
Yeah, I left out ag too. You
Mhm.
know, that feels another third rail.
Yeah, well, that's existing agriculture, not new. So
Yeah.
protection of it, you know, like maybe you would have different setbacks for existing agriculture or something like that, or exemption for, like, currently the Wetland Protection Act has an agricultural exemption for existing agricultural use. Do we want to have something like that for under this bylaw?
Yeah, I mean, my take, is
I don't think we want to go be regulating tender crop for farming in wetlands, you know, that they've been doing for
yeah,
many, many years.
I think that'd be biting off more than we can chew.
Yeah,
Getting into that.
exactly. That's the reason I included that item. Dan, did you have any thoughts on it?
I just left the last three out. It just doesn't seem to me like it's
Yeah.
conservation wetland subjects.
Okay. And I can't remember, Pete, did you already answer?
Yeah, it was kind of the last two I left off.
Okay. And the next one is, if you believe minimum buffer zone setbacks should be included, please indicate whether you believe there should be exceptions or relief to minimum setbacks for any of the following. Now, this is where I think we can, buy a little bit of goodwill from the community, because most of the objections that were being raised that I heard previously had to do with people not wanting their home sites, overregulated. People don't have such an objection for new construction. If somebody's building next to them, they definitely want to have, some tight rules for what can and can't be done. So there's a different mindset. And it's, for example, in Ipswich, they still have setbacks for single family home construction, for additions and decks and patios and pools and all that. It's just a reduced setback for homes that were existing prior to a certain date, and provided there's no change in use. So if your project you're a single family home residential site and your project is accessory to a single family home residential site, you get the benefit of reduced setbacks. If you're new construction, you have bigger setbacks. Some towns have smaller setbacks for minor projects that are over lawn or over other, sort of unnaturalized areas. Again, reduced setback for agriculture, potentially. Landscaping activities that do not result in disturbance to existing naturalized vegetation. So if somebody wants to put in a raised garden bed or something that's over existing lawn, and they're not cutting down trees to do it. Do we need, is it a big deal if that's 5 feet from a wetland or 10 feet from a wetland? It's probably not going to have an impact, but I'm just trying to tease out certain kinds of projects that might not necessarily have to be regulated as strictly. Areas that are like, existing driveways that are already near wetlands that are, they're gravel driveways, somebody with to pave it or something like that. Shallow slopes with there's little potential for erosion. We can specify certain conditions that are eligible for reduced setbacks, or we can provide waiver provisions for those setbacks where you can say, if you can apply for a waiver under these conditions, and here's the type of mitigation that we think would be appropriate for those. This is getting to the regulatory end of it, but it's good if we know in the bylaw what we're anticipating in the regulations, easier to form the language in the bylaw so that it will help meet that, will help bridge the gap there. Does that make sense? Water dependent projects, obviously docks, piers, boardwalks, they're not going to meet setback requirements because they need to be in the resource. Municipal projects, maybe they should be held to the same standard as all the residents, unless there's a no alternative. Same for utility projects, ecological restoration projects. Again, often they tend to be in the resource, so those may be eligible for reduced setbacks. And emergency projects. Emergency projects probably shouldn't even be on there because they're a category of themselves, so probably shouldn't even be on this list. So I guess I'll throw it out to Dan. Do you have any thoughts on this one?
I kind of had a hard time picking and choosing among the
Yeah.
list, but I think this reading I did today, again, it was Newburyport, dealt with, the whole waiver thing or variance or whatever you wish to call it. If the project can't be completed, with the stated setbacks, then, there's some rationale to reduce those setbacks. So I'm more interested in seeing some specifics on a waiver process than, I didn't really understand the landscaping thing, but that sort of makes sense to me now that you've talked about it.
It might be a patio or
Yeah. I
something like that.
think I've seen places where,
Fire
a
pits.
storage shed is only 10 feet or something like that
Mhm.
from the resource area. Yeah, I could see some of those, but I think a broader, solution for, well, if we can't do any, if we got these setbacks, we can't do anything, there should be some relief,
Pete?
It's funny, Dan, you said the 10-foot, shed from this, from a resource. And, we make allowances, right? And then we ask the question, well, you're not going to store anything in there, right? You're not going to store any gasoline, you're not going to store any of this or that. But, it's like, like in planning, we're not an enforcement board. And, so does it make more sense to really look out for the protection of what the commission feels is important rather than what the personal needs of our residents are? And it's one of those, it's a fine line. And again, some of these things, I don't think, the agriculture, we need to worry about the landscaping, the shallow slopes. I think municipal is going to have its own issues. Utility are going to have their own issues because they need to do something. And emergency protocols, but the others I think are, things worth giving consideration to. So some of the things I felt were significant and some I felt might not be appropriate. If that answers your question.
And Brian?
I would be interested in doing both, an all of the above approach where sort of, maybe we just write it up very strictly, to say there are no exceptions, blah, 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 this is the hard line, and then say, well, unless, this is the horse trading that we want to get into. And so, we're not giving away anything for free, so to speak, but we also are giving ourselves as much leeway as we want to use.
Right. I think the idea is that you write it so that you don't have to give waivers very often. You know what I mean? If you're giving waivers every meeting, then it kind of defeats the purpose. Then you undercut the whole, the performance standard entirely. So
Right.
I was just trying to create a scenario where you could say these projects would qualify under a different standard or something like that, so that we're not always looking at people trying to get exceptions.
Well,
Because there are good reasons for exceptions, but if we just are issuing them all the time, then it's
yeah,
maybe not.
just maybe would structure it differently for exceptions. So I wouldn't so much make an
Yeah.
exception as make it, you know, a part of the process, right? Or like maybe say for every 10 square feet of shed on existing lawn, you know, you need to give up, I don't know, 5 square feet of lawn and give it back, or there's some kind of, but I know that's not really how the WPA works either. So, the other thing about this, though, that I think would be useful would be, especially for the small projects, like replacing a lawn with a deck or a lawn with a shed, would be coming up with some sort of administrative approval, because
Yep.
these little
Yeah.
things are just a waste of everybody's time. You know, it takes about 2 weeks to train an agent on what to do with, you know, converting lawn to shed. So even if, you know, Sam and Sam's successor and Sam's successor's successor, right? Like even if we get really far apart from that, yeah, you know, to have to bother people with the filing fees and the whole.
Yeah. The other thing we could do is make certain projects eligible for requests for determinations upfront, you know, just avoid the filing fees and avoid the abutter notification, avoid the need for stamped plans and all that, and say certain, you know, these projects we typically would see as a request for determination. So
Yeah.
if not just an administrative approval. Yeah. And so that's a good point, to just maybe we be thinking about that just as a policy, that there may be projects that should be considered that. But this
I
is
think,
obviously, the point of this bylaw, I think, is to really protect the land that's at most risk from new development.
I think we need to be really, really careful with that municipal project deal too. I mean, even just that, the bathhouse project, there was, you know, a lot of people who were opposed to the project because, you know, we were basically asking for an exception to the rule. We had a good reason for the exception to not have to raise that building on pilings because it's just a bathroom and no one was living there. So there was a good reason for it. And the town was able to get the exception from the BBRS. But I think that's a very slippery slope that we could potentially fall down with municipal projects, and a lot of people who could say, well, why does the town get exemptions for doing this stuff?
Exactly.
I mean,
that's why I put it there, so that we can have that discussion. That it doesn't,
yeah, and
not,
and as a municipal entity, you know, municipalities, state departments, they don't have to pay filing fees. So, you know, and that's something that's written into the WPA. That's not our thing, obviously. You know, the worst thing about it is that, you know, there's that wait period for doing municipal projects, but I think holding the town to the same standard that everybody else is held to, so long as there's no good reason not to, is something that we really need to kind of keep up with, because I can see a lot of people turning around and saying that they have a lot of issues with that. And unfortunately, if one thing is an issue, you know, you could get half the town on board to vote down the bylaw in its entirety because they have one issue with one thing.
Yep. Yep. And again, these are items that are probably going to be in more regulation, but I just want to set the stage a little bit here, because we're working on both at the same time, it seems like. So can you scroll down to the next one? Okay. Okay, this is hopefully a little bit easier. Which of the following would you consider appropriate mitigation for unavoidable impacts within a minimum setback areas? So this is what is mitigation? What do we consider mitigation for a waiver? Planting of native vegetation, removal of invasive species, improvements to coastal resiliency, removal of existing impervious surfaces, enhancements to wildlife habitat, offsite mitigation, increase public education or recreational opportunities. And I had all of them except for the last two. Brian?
Yeah, so I didn't check the box for enhancements to wildlife habitat. Just because I feel like that's kind of squishy. You know,
Yeah.
removal
Actually,
of
I didn't
invasive
either.
species.
That's right. I didn't check that one either. I don't think. Sometimes you do, like people just put up nest boxes or, create some, sandy areas for turtle nesting habitat or something. Sometimes it, they could be, that's much harder to do and you have to be creative about it, but.
Right. I mean, if we had a list of discrete activities, all right, then I can work with it. But if we're just going to say, bring me some improvement, and we're going to wing it and seat of our pants, I'm not into that.
That makes sense.
I'm not into the public education or recreation. It's wishful thinking, potentially. I would be into offsite mitigation because, we've seen lots of little properties, and there's nowhere to put anything sometimes. I'm not saying do it for everybody, but, to at least have the structure to, I think might be useful. Obviously, I check them.
Dan?
I probably just, I don't know what I checked off. Planting and native vegetation. I didn't really see much here. If you have unavoidable impacts, I think you just, in many of the cases we see, I think you just gotta live with it, removal of invasive species. That's something that probably might happen anyways if it's some area that's that's part of the project. I don't know how. Do you have an example of improvements for coastal resiliency?
Like, elevating a structure to make it, take it out of the flood zone. It could be a driveway or parking lot, or it could be an increase in culvert size to improve tidal flow. It could be, there are more and more of them that are coming up now, improving, allowing flood flow through a building with not necessarily by elevating the building, but they create gaps in the foundation to allow things to flow through. So.
I think my ideal would be to have, if there were temporary impacts in particular in this, it's just restoration of the, the 25-foot as best as possible to native vegetation or just sort of naturalized vegetation. That's it for me.
Okay. Pete? Oh, you're muted.
My apologies. I thought everything was important except for two, and I'll get to this in a second. I am the eternal optimist, so I do believe in education, public education. That's just me, because I think the more that we enhance people, the better things are. Offsite mitigation, I just didn't. I don't know if I feel real comfortable with that. I see developers taking real advantage of something like that. I just, I've seen some stuff that hasn't been. And then I said removal of existing impervious surfaces. I would love for it to happen, but I don't know how realistic it is. But it could be a component, but everything else I was in favor of.
Great, thanks. I do see that happen fairly frequently where there's either an old foundation or old pavement or a structure or something that's on the site and they can remove, get a little more infiltration. That does happen occasionally.
I appreciate that, yeah.
Yep. Okay, next item. If you believe that minimum buffer setbacks are appropriate, do you believe these should be adjusted further to accommodate any of the following conditions? Okay, this is kind of similar to one of the previous questions, but just saying, if we establish minimum for an addition or a new house at, say, 50-foot no build, just throwing it out there as a number. If there's a vernal pool on the site, do we want to make that 75 feet or if it go from 30 to 50 feet or something like that? If the wetland is particularly sensitive because it has a very high resource value or has rare species, do we want to think about modifying that setback in the different direction, making it stricter? Before I was talking about modifying it and making it less strict. Pete, I guess I'll go the other way this time.
Sure. I am in favor of all, and I was questioning presence of significant overstory trees, kind of double-edged sword sort of thing on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but everything else I felt was valuable.
Dan?
Yeah, I think I may be a little confused on, I think I'm in favor of, for vernal pools, having something in excess of the minimum buffer setback. It seems like there's a couple of questions here what we're actually looking at. I don't really see the need for increasing, there's no buffer for rare species habitat unless I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, and again, that's mostly natural heritage is reviewing that. So we may not need to step into that at all. I know Ben was always concerned about things that are not mapped that may turn up. And right now, in some version of our bylaw, there was something about protecting rare species habitat. So
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to take natural heritage.
yeah,
There's a process there, and it doesn't really seem fair to me to, lump on to that. I mean, I think we certainly could have an ACEC buffer. Of other towns seem to have pretty serious buffers there. So I could see that being more. I don't know how overstory trees. I think we can get into that as part of riverfront if there is riverfront involved. I think there's already some state regulation on some of that type of thing. Floodplain, I don't.
Yeah, that was kind of thrown in there. I mean, right now there's no buffer zone under state regulations for floodplain at all. And so we, to add any setbacks, or it may not be necessary because you're either in it or you're out of it. So that was just sort of thrown in there. But
Yeah,
I guess you're saying vernal pools, yes, and maybe ACEC, but not the rest.
that's pretty much it. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Right?
Yeah, on the list, the thing that I don't think we should be using, the floodplain, at least in the 100-year standard, with the way the rainfall data is changing. If we're going to say that, we should say, the 4 inches in 4-hour floodplain, or the 5 inches in 5-hour floodplain, or some kind of storm standard. I know 100 years, people know it, but yeah, it just feels antiquated. So yeah, I wouldn't want to do that. But
Yeah, I mean, that one probably shouldn't even be on the list. So yeah.
Well, what ends up happening though is that if we end up talking about the climate change floodplain that's going to be bigger than 100-year, right? Then we end up almost creating a buffer to 100-year floodplain because acknowledging a realistic flood.
Right, and it's kind of getting to the coastal resiliency thing of recognizing that 100-year or whatever whatever the FEMA zone A is. You don't have to call it 100-year floodplain, but it's bordering land subject to flooding under the state regulations, which is tied to the FEMA 100-year floodplain.
Right.
But
does that change now?
Maybe doesn't need to have any further setback requirements for it.
Right, but if we, if the 100-year floodplain as mapped by FEMA is X and the realistic, the new normal 100-year floodplain is something different, maybe we would buffer it and say the buffer just automatically tracks with, the latest model from, I don't know, NOAA or pick your agency, right?
Yeah. I mean,
just so
it
that we're
has to be,
keeping up.
yeah, it has to be publicly available. So people have to know where to, to have it easily accessible so they know what elevation is the floodplain that we're looking at.
And to Pete's point, it's not a regulatory point I'm trying to make. It almost doesn't matter if we regulate that buffer. It would just matter that people know that they are going to be in a spot that they should be aware of. Right? Because if you put the FEMA 100-year on the map, on the plan set, and people go 5 feet outside of it, and then they're surprised when the flood hits, because it said, oh, FEMA 100-year flood,
Yeah,
maybe
if you add
fines.
setbacks to a 100-year flood, you're incorporating a large portion of the town that's not wetland, basically. So the floodplain extends beyond where the wetland is. So
Right.
I'm not sure that should be in this category at all, because we'd be increasing our role quite a bit, just regulating a lot more.
Well, and that's just it. Like, I would say maybe for our plan submissions, we would have a requirement for like where the floodplain is, and that has to be drawn on somewhere.
Mhm.
But then we just don't regulate it, right? We just require it in the draw.
Well, you do. I mean, obviously there's, if you're filling in it, there's requirement for compensation from that.
Well, okay,
floodplain.
right. But to Pete's point about public education, just giving people the opportunity to recognize where their land is would be nice.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit on a soapbox. I should.
Yeah, we're still regulating floodplain, but I'm just saying, I don't know that we need to have buffers to it or minimum setbacks to it necessarily.
Right. And I mean,
We'll still
maybe
be
this
continuing
belongs
to-
more in, planning boards bailiwick.
Mhm, yeah,
Yeah.
all right, just to keep moving things along here. Do you believe, number 8, do you believe that smaller wetlands not connected to another water body or waterway, i.e. isolated wetlands, are not currently regulated under state regulations should be included in the bylaw? And I know we've had discussions about this before, so Brian? Yes? Dan?
Yes.
And Pete?
Yes.
And I did too. And I came up with 2,000 square feet, is just based on sort of my knowledge of where that's sort of in the middle of what a lot of communities use. Some use 5, some use the minimum. I've seen 1,000 as the minimum. I've never seen it in the hundreds. I don't think I have. Brian, do you have thoughts on size?
I would link the size to a vernal pool, just so that we don't have vernal pools that aren't, and maybe this is carts and horses, but if we have a vernal pool and we don't have it as a wetland, is there some space? Would there be daylight between those two? And so I would tend smaller just to account for vernal pools.
Well, what if it's
Little baby vernal pools,
fall
right?
and there's you've got a wetland and it's not the time of year where it's holding any water and you don't know if it's a vernal pool?
Yes.
What
What if? I
need
don't
to
know. That would have to be fleshed out, but
Yeah, or if it's a 10,000 square foot isolated wetland and it's not a vernal pool.
well, right, then we catch it with, say, a 2,000 or 2,500, but that's that in between gap. I would hate to, like, let's just say we have a 2,000 square foot limit, and then we have a 1,750 square foot vernal pool that we somehow let go.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so it's minimum of 2,000 square foot, for example, unless it's determined to be a vernal pool, in which case all vernal pools are protected.
Yeah, and that would sort of extend to some of the other resource areas. Maybe vernal pools have like a 500 square foot, just so that we make sure we get buffer zones and all that. And then
Okay.
views or isolated the flooding,
Okay.
blah, 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 we round up.
Okay. Pete?
Yep, so I actually, yes, I agreed, and I actually went 2,000 square foot because that was the number that we were using before, I think, when we were talking about the project off Pearson Drive, and I think that was the number that everybody kept on coming back to, so that's where I
Yeah,
landed.
I thought, yeah, okay. And Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been troubled by the fact that some very small isolated wetlands could be vernal pools and how to kind of reconcile that. But
Okay.
you know, I think it's hard to pick a number. And are you familiar with the Georgetown bylaw?
Mhm.
I mean, that says any isolated wetland, regardless of size, is presumed to be a vernal pool until
I know,
proven.
and that's a little bit crazy. Because
is,
it's really hard
it
to
is, but,
demonstrate a negative, yeah. Yeah,
But nonetheless, it's extreme, but
right.
I would go with 1,000 or 500 or something like
Yep.
that.
Good. But, yep. I mean, sometimes you have these, these areas, they're pretty small, so the buffer zone around them is way bigger than the resource itself. So, it ends up being a huge impingement on a property if it's a small wetland with a big buffer zone to it. So
I mean,
I can see having it protected if it's a known vernal pool or a potential vernal pool. But a lot of these areas are going to be not deep enough to actually support vernal pool habitats. They could just be, just shallow depressions. Sometimes they're, in a yard or something, and it becomes a challenge to catch them all when they're that small, to make sure that you're covering them all.
I think I actually like what Brian come up with, which is, if it's an isolated wetland, it's not a vernal pool, I don't think it deserves any special setback. I mean,
even if it's 20,000 square feet or something in size. I mean, it could be big. It's just not connected to a stream or
what's the state? What's 310 say on the? It's like 4,500 or something, isn't it?
Nope. For a bordering vegetated wetland, it has to, the key is it can be any size. It just needs to touch on a water body or a waterway. But there's an isolated land subject to flooding, which is a bit confined basin depression that holds a 1/4 acre foot of water, but that doesn't have a buffer zone at all.
Right.
So it's capturing, areas that provide some localized flood storage.
Yeah.
But they don't have to be vegetated. They don't have to meet the criteria for soils and everything else. They just have to have the right shape and hold water. So what this is intended to do is catch, wetland areas, small wetland areas that are functioning as wetlands, but don't otherwise meet the criteria for isolated land subject to flooding.
Yeah, and Dan, to jump in there for a second, I'm not saying don't protect them. I want to agree with Mary and Pete's, like, let's just say 2,000 square feet. Great. But then for things below that might be, vernal certifiable, I would drop that because, vernal pools, like, let's just stack them with whatever protections we can. So that's all.
Yeah.
So sounds like that one needs to be fleshed out a little more, and that's an important one. How do we determine what is the appropriate size, whether we're going to do it, whether we do it at all, whether we enact that at all. That was one of the big, initially one of the big reasons for enacting a bylaw is to protect those areas that fall through the cracks in the state regulations, these kind of wetlands. And I don't think we're talking about the 250 square foot size ones. We're talking about the larger ones that maybe are vernal pools, maybe not, but just don't receive any protection at all under the state regs. So I guess maybe to be continued on that one.
And it sounds like, relatively speaking, we all are in agreement. It's just sort of working out the fine print.
Mhm.
The broad brush stuff seems similar.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the big items that need to be decided as part of a bylaw, because if you're going to add to areas that you're protecting that are not protected under the state regulations, you need to put that specifically in the bylaw, not in the regulations. Let's see, what's the next one? Number 9, if you believe that smaller isolated wetlands should be protected, should these areas have the same buffer zone and setbacks as other wetlands? I guess maybe this might be premature if we don't have a firm answer to the one before, but would these areas also have buffer zones around them and setbacks? No build zone or no disturb zone? Brian says yes. Dan?
Yeah.
Okay. Qualified, yeah. Didn't that, maybe thinking about it some more. Pete?
Yeah, it was a yes.
Yeah, okay. 10, I think, is an easy one. Should the 100-year flood, well, anyway, it is for me, but should the 100-year floodplain be included as a resource area in any local bylaw? Currently, the 100-year floodplain is a resource area in state regulations, but does not contain any buffer zone.
I'm going to repeat my answer before.
Yes, you say yes. Oh, you want to refer to something other than the 100-year floodplain, though. Okay. And Dan?
Uncertain.
Yeah. And Pete?
It was a yes.
Okay. Same with setbacks, Pete?
Yep.
Okay. Dan, you don't have to answer this one. Yeah. And Brian, did you have any thoughts?
Not the same as before. If the 100-year floodplain is not truly the reality of what that floodplain is meant to represent, then it needs to be enlarged so that we're being accurate.
Mhm.
I would prefer to be future oriented than past oriented, especially when it comes to rainfall math.
Mhm. Yeah, so maybe tying it to some the more recent Cornell data, or some other data that's going to be available soon.
Yeah. Or even the extreme versions of the stuff that's out, because what is it? There's like the NOAA plus, and then some communities are using NOAA plus. I'm not even sure what that means, but presumably they're statistically getting out to the outside edges of the statistical curve. And so instead of regulating to the middle, regulating to the extremes.
Mhm.
That's not something I've gotten to yet.
Yeah. So the last is just, does anyone have any other thoughts, comments on either the process or the content of doing a bylaw?
I will say I'm willing to fold on just about anything. If anybody pushes, I'm just gonna like a leaf in the wind and just.
Okay, maybe not the best choice for the moderator at town meeting. So to stand up at town meeting.
I mean, right, the point of this for me is being able to start regulating and building out expectations for applicants and cleaning up so we don't have the same conversations over and over and over again. And everything else is gravy, as far as I'm concerned. So,
Sam, did you have anything?
I don't think I really have anything else to add, no.
Do we have anybody in the public with us?
We do not. It is just the 5 of us.
Mhm.
I think I'm ready to make a motion that Mary gets to be vice chair. You're running this meeting lovely. Ben's leaving. Ben's the vice chair. We're gonna need another one. I think you volunteered yourself.
Yeah. I'm about to log into yet another meeting here pretty soon.
Oh, jeez.
So I just want to add one thing if I could. So I don't know if the rest of you caught this in Samantha's draft regulations. She had sort of a different take on jurisdiction than what we had in the bylaw. And I sort of like it. It's just, it gives jurisdiction, to like intermittent streams. I think that can be important. So there's 2 different things. Some of these questions tonight were they were focused on jurisdiction. Some were focused on, setbacks and performance standards, but I do think it's not harmful to claim jurisdiction for certain resource areas that are not currently covered, like intermittent, like, there's others, but, then it leaves if you have no regulations, you've got jurisdiction, they have to be mapped and accounted for, but there's no setback, for instance. But I think oftentimes, like on intermittent streams, there might be, maintaining natural flow and that sort of thing. So, I'm not convinced that we can't have more, claim more jurisdiction than we have in the draft bylaw that we currently have out there.
Mhm. So currently under the state rules, intermittent streams are protected, but only if they flow within or out of a resource area, not upgrading streams. So I think, and I'm sorry, Sam, I have still not had a chance to look at your, the regs that you drafted, but is that what, are you trying to get protection for sort of the portions of intermittent streams that are currently regulated under the state rules, or just to add them as they normally would be to reflect the state rules?
Honestly, I didn't really have an agenda for that. It was more just trying to encompass as much as possible. I tried to be really, really thorough with the regulations draft, in hopes that it would be more of like, we're taking things out as opposed to we have to add a whole bunch of stuff and missing things. So I was really just trying to kind of include jurisdiction for pretty much everything that we could possibly, warrant jurisdiction over. And then the idea was to kind of say like, oh, okay, well, we can narrow this down a little bit more. We can take this out altogether or something. So.
Okay, thanks.
I think that was also sort of, you were just sort of clip that whole section from, I believe it was Wellfleet. And, there are other towns that have that, any stream, any wetland.
Yep.
It's a lot simpler than, something of a particular size on Tuesday or something,
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I'm gonna second Dan's opinions.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Mary.
So, did anybody have any suggestions on like where we go from here? Should we have another meeting? Should we reach out to town council and to Tracy as the next steps?
So I think that asking Tracy and Martha for their opinions on either finding or spending or getting grants, to get somebody to, really polish this up. That's a good idea. And Sam can obviously, find out if that will fit into the work calendar of the town. But other than that, I think we just need to do a few more of these where we're trying to involve, we didn't get anybody this time. But the times we've had people show up, they've complained about being left out. And so I just think the more opportunities to give the public the opportunity to engage, the better. So Sam, I think, was building out a schedule. So the sooner that can get built out so that we know when our deadlines are, and so how often we might need to do this kind of thing. I think that would be my priority, because town meetings sneak up on you. You have to be ready so far in advance that I would like to be ready in advance of that. And maybe we finish our own conversations amongst ourselves and we just spend 6 months seeing if anybody has something to say and we can add or subtract as needed. But I'd rather not do another lap, so to speak. Let's get the next town meeting and be ready for that, and let's make sure that we're ready for that. And then if it doesn't work out, well, whatever, fine. But yeah, the calendar and the schedule would be my priority.
We do have another workshop scheduled for June as well. I think we had agreed on scheduling, and we had the one in February, and then we did this month, and then we scheduled one for June as well. So we do still have another one coming up.
I think having, some insight from both Tracy and Martha as to, acquiring funding to help us is very important and useful. I think consultants are great. And Mary, as you know, consultants are great and they can chew through a lot of money. We have talent here. I think we just define what the parameters are. This is what we want the guidance in, and help us get from this point to this point without a lot of extraneous babble.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, I think we're going to need a little bit of help.
And I meant babble from the consultant. I didn't mean babble from us. I meant babble from the consultant. They can look at you and they can just chew through hours and hours, and you go through reports and everything looks great. And at the end of the day, you get nowhere. So I think we have to do that stealth.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's a better way to say it, stealth rather than babble.
Yeah. Well, I think that was fairly productive, and
Thank you, Mary.
I'm thinking about it some more.
No, it was good. And, thanks, Mary, for the prompts. They were useful, and hopefully, we know our minds better now, right?
Great.
Cool. Well, enjoy your next meeting. And Sam, you should probably, somebody ought to stay, right? We're on till 9. Is it posted? Did we think we'd be done?
It is posted for 9. I can leave the meeting open, but I can't imagine that if we've, if we haven't gotten anybody for the first hour and a half, that we're going to get anybody new.
It seems unlikely, doesn't it?
Yeah, and rather than, it doesn't seem like it would make much sense to just have me sitting here in case anybody comes in, because then, you know, I mean, I can get comments from people and, you know, try to answer some questions, but, you know, it's not going to be part of the recording and everything. So,
No, I think we can close the meeting.
yeah.
Don't you, Peter?
I do. As a matter of fact, if you'd like a motion to that effect, I'd be more than happy to make that.
It sounds like we have a motion on the table.
Second.
Oh, we have a first and a second. All right, roll call vote. Daniel.
Yes.
Mary,
Yes,
and Peter.
Yes.
great.
I'll also vote in the affirmative. Like I said, that was a very useful thing. At the next meeting, Sam, let's put Mary on as replacing Ben. What do you think?
Ben's doing a great job. He needs to work all the way to the end.
All right.
Last
We can,
meeting.
fair enough. Well, until Dan or Pete volunteer themselves, you're first in line for the firing squad. I get the feeling.
Okay, well, with that,
everyone.
we will
Thank
see
you,
you
Mary.
on May 3rd.
Beautiful.
Right.
Right now.
See you guys.
I know.
Good night.